Welcome to Trust the Badge. This is a very special episode for Trust the Badge, as I got to interview U.S. Congressman Andy Barr, the representative of Kentucky's 6th District. Although Representative Barr is the chairman of the Financial Institutions and Monetary Policy Subcommittee, as well as a senior member of the House Financial Services Committee, Representative Barr shares his extensive views about supporting law enforcement and especially their relationship they have with their communities. On a quick note, I would like to mention that Trust the Badge does not endorse any politicians, nor does Trust the Badge support any political views. The main purpose of this episode is to interview someone who's very passionate about building trust between law enforcement and the community, that being Representative Andy Barr. So please enjoy this episode.
Well, hello, Jay Soar, and thank you for hosting me on the Trust the Badge podcast. My name is Andy Barr. I am the U.S. representative from Kentucky's 6th Congressional District. That is Central Kentucky, and it's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
Thank you, Representative Barr. I really appreciate you being here as well. This is my first time interviewing someone that is a congressman on this podcast, and my second time interviewing someone that's not in law enforcement. So I'm really interested to see how this goes. Just to start off, what encouraged you to become a U.S. congressman?
Well, thanks for the question. There's really no other reason to run for public office other than to want to make a difference and a positive difference. And certainly that's what ultimately motivated me. There's a lot of issues that I'm passionate about getting our national debt under control, passionate about limited government and free enterprise. I'm passionate about national security and public safety. And after college, I worked for a U.S. congressman from Missouri for a couple of years before I went to law school. And I was very impressed with Congressman Jim Talent, who was my mentor. He was a very thoughtful, smart, highly educated member of Congress. He was a principled conservative, but he also had a pragmatic streak that impressed me as someone who was collegial and able to get things accomplished. And so, I really believe that you owe it to your philosophy to win and to advance the cause, whatever that cause is. And Congressman Talent was able to achieve that, was able to get things done, advance his viewpoint, advance his philosophy. And so I've tried to emulate that in my congressional career. I'm in my 6th term in Congress, and I was a lawyer who represented businesses primarily who had problems with the government. And I saw the government harassing small businesses and making business more difficult, more challenging. And I represented those businesses in front of administrative agencies typically. And it really motivated me to, run for Congress to get the government out of the way where it needed to. And then also, to defend those parts of government that really provide, provide for the general welfare and public safety so that those businesses and entrepreneurs can operate in a safe environment.
That's a very inspiring story. And that just segues into my next question. As a legislator, right now, what do you typically advocate for, and what sort of impacts have they had in your district or in Kentucky as a whole?
My district is unique out of the 435 districts, just like every district is unique. I have certain signature industries. The thoroughbred horse industry, we are known as the horse capital of the world in central Kentucky. The bourbon distilling industry, I represent the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, which makes it a fun district. I also represent a very robust auto manufacturing sector of the economy. Toyota has the largest manufacturing facility in the world in my district in Georgetown, Kentucky, where we manufacture the Camry and the Avalon and the RAV4 and the Lexus ES. And I also represent the University of Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky University. So higher education is a big part of my district. The coal industry is more prominent in Eastern Kentucky, but I would say energy is an important part of our economy as well. So my job is to advocate for those signature industries. I also serve on the House Financial Services Committee. So the financial services industry is very important to me, and I recognize the important role that credit markets and capital markets play in the flourishing of American business and free enterprise and individuals and families and households.
You have quite the diverse resume. That sounds really interesting. Now, going into the law enforcement topic, what are your views on the current state of trust between law enforcement and the community in Kentucky? And what steps need to be taken to improve it if needed?
Well, in general, I think there's solid state of trust. I think most Kentuckians respect law enforcement, recognize that men and women in blue are putting their lives on the line for the safety and security of the community each and every day, and that the vast majority of police officers and our law enforcement personnel at the federal, state, and local level, whether it's, the ATF or the FBI or the DEA at the federal level, or whether it's the Kentucky State Police at the state level, or if it's the Lexington Division of Police or the local sheriff's offices in Clark County, Montgomery County, Powell County, Madison County, my district, that these are really good people and that they're well trained and that they respect their role and so by and large, I think the relationship between the community and law enforcement in Kentucky is good. Now, having said that, we do have our instances of certain challenging dialogues and challenging relationships in various neighborhoods, which is the case everywhere in the country. We had a high profile case in Louisville, the Breonna Taylor case that led to some protests in the city of Louisville, and morale is down with Louisville Metro Police, and part of that has to do with the fact that we don't have enough law enforcement officers in the Louisville Metro Police Department. We don't have enough in Lexington either, the second largest city in Kentucky. We're short over 100 officers. So we need to do a better job with recruiting and retention, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that morale is high. And that's the best way to make sure that the relationship between the community and law enforcement is good, is to make sure that we recruit and retain the best and brightest into law enforcement.
Wow, that's really great to hear that the trust is really good between the community and law enforcement in your area, but it's very unfortunate to hear that there's a shortage of police officers. Knowing that, what legislative measures do you support or propose to enhance transparency and accountability within law enforcement agencies, or to maybe even recruit more police officers?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I supported Congressman Pete Stauber's Justice Act, which was a House companion to legislation introduced by U.S. Senator Tim Scott. Pete, my colleague from Minnesota, he is law enforcement himself. And this bill would increase transparency, accountability, and performance so that our nation's law enforcement officers are better prepared to protect and care for the communities that they serve. The reforms would have built upon President Trump's executive order to develop policies to encourage proactive police strategies to address concerns and strengthen and build upon the relationships that ensure safety and security. It would improve law enforcement transparency through additional reporting, annual reporting of use of force, reporting on no-knock warrants. Also, it would have ensured law enforcement agencies and officers are accountable by developing accessible disciplinary record systems and ensuring transparent policing. So there would be more funding for body cameras to store and retain footage and also the equipment. And it would increase penalties for any individual who knowingly or willfully falsified a police report. It also would close the law enforcement consent loophole, making it unlawful for a federal law enforcement officer to engage in any improper acts while acting under the color of law with an individual who's under arrest and detention or custody. And then importantly, the bill would have improved training for officers to perform their duty. So it dealt with the issue of chokeholds. It clarified the duty to intervene So there would be more training curricula and certifying public and private entities to offer training relating to excessive force. It would provide funding for law enforcement agencies to pay for the costs associated with duty to intervene training, de-escalation training, which is very important, and community policing. So cops on the beat and burn jag grant programs. And I'm very supportive of burn jag, but I will tell you, cops funding as well. But I want to see that money go left to, rehabilitation programs, because there's a lot of drug rehabilitation program funding that's out there that's separate and apart. I want more cops and burn jag grant dollars to go to actual law enforcement, to help with training, to help with law enforcement agencies themselves. And we need a reauthorization of those appropriations. So that's just one example. But here's kind of my overall thinking on this is that we need to adequately resource law enforcement agencies at the federal, state, and local level, especially at the local level where budgets are tight and where morale is down. Because if we resource local law enforcement, if we stop and end this crazy defund the police movement and we adequately resource law enforcement, then we are going to be able to recruit and retain the best and brightest. Retention is really important. Morale is very important. We will avoid some of the very rare instances of police misconduct that happen around the country. And I would emphasize very rare, but we will avoid those rare instances of police misconduct when we adequately support transparency, reporting, and training, and equipping law enforcement with the resources, the equipment, the training that they need. When we do that, and we pay our law enforcement officers adequately, we're going to get good, solid community policing. We're going to get de-escalation. We're going to get public safety, and we're going to avoid some exceptional, unfortunate instances.
Congressman, I could not agree more. You sound like an expert on this topic, which I'm very glad. But knowing about how you've supported law enforcement in their goal and in their opportunities to build their trust with the community, in your opinion, what role should community engagement play in strengthening the relationship between law enforcement and the community? And how can we facilitate this?
Well, it's vital. I mean, it's a two-way street, right? I mean, the law enforcement acts on behalf of the community. Okay. They protect and serve the community. And this idea that you're involved with of community policing is very important. I believe in it. And I know the chief of police in Lexington, who's my constituent, they do a great job with community policing, engaging the community, getting their feedback, making sure that there's, clear channels of communication. Because ultimately, who suffers when you don't have a robust police presence? The community that is victimized by criminals and gangs and drug trafficking and prostitution and other types of crime that diminish the vibrancy of our communities. And so everybody wants to be safe in their homes, in their businesses, in their playgrounds, and in their schools. And so we need to support a dialogue and two-way street conversation, because the community can also, when there's a good relationship between law enforcement and the community will help law enforcement do their job well. They will be informing about criminal activity. They will be when there's less suspicion that someone is going to be wrongly accused of a crime, they will be more likely to participate in reporting crime. And so the community plays an important role, and law enforcement has a duty and obligation to engage in the community and solicit that engagement from the community. So how can we encourage and facilitate that? Obviously recruiting good, solid, well-trained, well-equipped police officers who understand how to de-escalate and also how to communicate in the community, hiring individuals from the community into the police force that patrols and keeps that community safe. That's often important to have people who know those communities, who grew up in those neighborhoods, and also to have a public fora and have town halls and ways in which the community can communicate safely, securely, and effectively to the law enforcement agency.
Thank you, Congressman. And speaking on those terms, are there any specific programs or initiatives that you endorse or advocate for to promote positive interactions and understanding between law enforcement and the community?
Well, I think those proactive recruiting efforts to recruit law enforcement from neighborhoods of particular interest and concern. I think also these town halls and portals of information and making sure that there's open lines of communication, engaging the schools, engaging in the churches, engaging in the organizations of civil society within those neighborhoods. That's always very important for law enforcement. The police departments around the country, they know how to do this. They know how to do it. Congress doesn't need to micromanage or mandate some of these things, but I do think the enhanced training is something worthwhile, and that's why I support the Jack Byrne grants, the cops grants. I also think we need to pass legislation in the Congress that makes sure that law enforcement officers know that the Congress and that the community has their back. So I've co-sponsored bills like the Back the Blue Act, which would create harsher sentencing guidelines for those who attempt to or commit murder against a current or former federal law enforcement officer, harsher sentencing for assaults on federal, state, or local law enforcement officers, and also, funding to help law enforcement agencies promote trust and ensure legitimacy among law enforcement agencies and the communities they serve, develop comprehensive and responsive policies relevant to the relationship between law enforcement and communities, balance the embrace of technology and digital communications with local needs, privacy assessments and monitoring, encourage implementation of policies that support community-based partnerships in the reduction of crime. So there are programs that will help reduce crime other than just, law enforcement investigations and enforcement. Crime Stoppers is a good example of that, encouraging citizens to report crime and also, emphasizing high quality, effective training and education. Those are important. Also, a Bill of Rights. I've co-sponsored a bill to establish a Bill of Rights to support law enforcement personnel nationwide. And the legislation, condemns these defund the police movements. It encourages healthy and collaborative relationship between law enforcement officers and the community they serve. And so that would be an important measure. I certainly support qualified immunity, protecting qualified immunity for law enforcement, which is a doctrine established and upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court to protect the rights of law enforcement officers to perform their duties in good faith without fear of being sued. That's really, really important to recruit and retain good people. Sheriff John Rutherford, who's now a member of Congress from Florida, he's got the Protect and Serve Act. I co-sponsored that. This would make it a federal crime to target law enforcement officers with an assault that results in serious bodily harm or death. And the Thin Blue Line Act, I've co-sponsored this bill over and over again. It would provide additional aggravating factors for the imposition of the death penalty based on the status of the victim, imposing the death penalty on any offender who kills or attempts to kill a federal law enforcement officer, firefighter, or first responder during the performance of their duties. These are bills that would show to law enforcement that we have their back, and it would help with morale, and it would also be a huge deterrent to target law enforcement officers. And I think, advocating for those kinds of initiatives will just improve law enforcement in this country because you're going to make sure that law enforcement knows that they are supported.
Congressman, I'm very glad that you support law enforcement as much as you do. And the way you speak about these efforts that you've put in and these efforts that you know about, it's very good to hear that there's going to be some change and there has been some change in order to support law enforcement and especially their relationships with the community. And going back to your earlier point, do you believe that law enforcement agencies should undergo additional training or reforms to better serve and understand the needs of the communities they police? And if so, what specific steps would you support?
Well, those bills that I've mentioned, I think all would do that. There would be more grants for state and local law enforcement to promote trust and ensure legitimacy among law enforcement agencies and the communities they serve. More training, more technology and digital communications that would help bringing together the community and law enforcement, more transparency, additional reporting, the de-escalation training, the use of technology and grants to upgrade existing technology, training law enforcement in their interaction with mentally ill individuals. All of these are about resourcing law enforcement, which is unfortunately often under resourced. And, compensation's a big piece of it too. Retirement security for these men and women who put their lives on the line every single day. Benefits and compensation for them when they get hurt in the line of duty, or God forbid they get killed in the line of duty for their families. These are things that need to be done. And so again, underscoring this senseless and downright dangerous movement of defund the police. It actually would achieve the exact opposite of what the so-called proponents of that movement say that they want, which is to reduce cases of police misconduct. As I say, the cases of police misconduct are rare, but they do exist in our country. And you're going to get more cases, not less cases of police misconduct if you under-resource and under-train law enforcement.
Congressman, I actually want to talk about that. So, the term defund the police, we've seen it happen many times before, and actually, those movements have failed. The evidence is just very clear. Police departments are not benefiting, and their communities are definitely not getting any better. For example, what does the term defund the police mean to you, and how do you support to oppose that in your district?
Well, the defund movement comes in many shapes and sizes, and of course, it is alive and well across the country, including in Kentucky. Now, literally defunding the police is insane. I mean, it's crazy. The idea that you would completely defund the police is just anarchy, and it would result in rampant crime, and it would actually hurt the very people who are most vulnerable in neighborhoods where there's high percentage of minority and poor people who don't have the wherewithal or the resources to privately secure those neighborhoods. You know, Wealthy neighborhoods can probably finance private policing and security, but minority and low income communities cannot. And they are the ones who would be most vulnerable to crime with a defund police effort. And I think many of those communities have spoken. That's why many of those communities have spoken up against the defund the police. Let me also just say, though, that the defund police movement can also come in the form of just diminishing support, both financial and moral support for law enforcement. And this is equally dangerous because, again, when you have a morale problem, when you under resource law enforcement, you don't get the training, you don't get the de escalation techniques, you don't get the community policing training, you don't get the equipment, you don't get the deterrence against crime, and you also get timidity in policing, and for good reason. If a law enforcement officer is under the threat of a personal lawsuit and that his personal, family financial security is on the line, if they do anything that a plaintiff lawyer says is out of line, then you're not going to have robust policing that actually keeps the community safe. So defund the police can come in many shapes and sizes, but it's all bad.
I completely agree, Congressman. Now let's look at the other side of the defund the police movement. Should there be more funding for law enforcement instead?
Yes. Yes, law enforcement is underfunded. I've been a strong supporter, not just of Burn Jag, not just of the COPS grant program at the federal level, but also of the HIDA program. We have a drug problem in the United States, a fentanyl crisis. Over 109,000 of our fellow citizens died of an overdose just last year. I support the high intensity drug trafficking area program, and I support more appropriations for that to help bring federal law enforcement to collaborate with local law enforcement for interdiction and helping. I also support Border Patrol and border security. And the Department of Homeland Security needs help and more robust funding to secure our southern border, where not only a lot of this fentanyl and drugs are flowing into our country, the narcotics officers in Kentucky, and I've talked a lot about this, that the sourcing of a lot of the drugs are coming from our open southern border. So we've got to support that as well, and immigration and customs enforcement as well. So it's a multifaceted approach. We need to support Border Patrol, border security, immigrations, customs enforcement. We need to support the DEA. We need to support our local law enforcement. That requires adequate funding, and that will make our community safe, and we'll have fewer poisons in our community as a result if we do that.
Congressman, just on a quick note, could you just explain to me how that situation is like in your district? Is it just as bad as it is everywhere else, or is it just somewhat better?
No, I mean, it's pretty bad. I mean, in Kentucky, we have an epidemic of fentanyl and heroin and drugs. Pills have been a problem in particularly eastern and rural Kentucky for a long time. But, I've spoken with our Narcotics Officers Association in Kentucky, and they point to an open southern border as the cause of a major influx of supply. And of course, the China is manufacturing a lot of the components that go into this synthetic opioid, and then they collaborate with the cartels of Mexico, and then they use gangs and other traffickers in the United States, and that pours into our communities, even in rural Kentucky. And so, part of it is HIDA, part of it is border customs and border protection, part of it is local law enforcement. There needs to be a lot of collaboration. And, the supply is a big part of it. Demand is part of it as well. And so we need those treatment and recovery programs. But we would not have the problem of 109,000 overdose deaths in the country if we didn't have this supply problem. That's why we need to secure our border.
I really hope that situation doesn't get any worse. But what message do you have for any current or future law enforcement listening to this interview? And how can they change the perspective of law enforcement in the future?
Well, the message is thank you. The message is we have your back. We back the blue. We appreciate the risk that you take every day when you put on that badge and put on that uniform and go out there and risk your health and your life to keep our community safe. You need to be and you deserve to be thanked for what you do. And we thank you also for doing it the right way, for getting the training, for seeking the training, for learning community policing and learning how to de escalate and learning how to make sure that you're developing relationships in the community so that not only are you deterring crime and enforcing the law and punishing criminals, but you are also helping the community improve itself and helping to educate people that there's another way other than crime. And that, through your example, you show what being a law abiding, productive member of the community actually looks like. So we know that it's a hard job. We know that it's challenging, and especially when you have these ludicrous movements like the defund the police movement out there that make life even harder. It's hard enough to go out there and put your life on the line and keep the community safe and get criminals off the streets, let alone have people say, well, you should be sued just for doing your job, or you should get a pay cut just for doing your job, very risky job. So hats off, and we're grateful for all the work of the men and women in law enforcement, and just keep up the good work in terms of contributing to making your communities a better place.
Ultimately, how do we trust the badge as a community?
Well, look, we trust the badge by making sure that we respect the fact that the police have an important and sometimes dangerous job to do, and that is to arrest people when they make a mistake, or worse, when they commit a very serious crime, and keep those bad people. And frankly, there are many bad people. Keep them off the street and put them behind bars. Punish them, hopefully rehabilitate them, but punish them and keep them off the streets to keep our streets safe and our neighborhoods safe. There's some bad people in this world. We got to recognize that. And we need to trust the badge by the safety of our communities. I think that's a mark of trusting the badge is when they do their job and they do it well, and they are allowed to do their job. Our communities are safer because bad people are no longer in those communities. And then the other piece of it is we trust the badge because we're resourcing law enforcement well enough to recruit good people into law enforcement who care very deeply about those communities, the people in those communities, keeping them safe, and even people who get in trouble, to teach them that there's a better way to engage them and to also get the training to do the job the right way. All of the techniques that law enforcement train on it each and every day.
Thank you, Congressman. And right before we end, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, my final thought is just a compliments to you for, as a young person, caring about law enforcement, caring about, the relationship between the community and law enforcement, and, wanting to make a difference. You asked me why I decided to become a congressman, and I told you is you want to make a difference. And I think you're making a difference with this Trust the Badge podcast, highlighting and raising the awareness of the importance of good police officers and the role that police officers play, and the things that we can do to enhance trust between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. So thank you very much for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for your time. And obviously, I'm sure the audience really appreciates you being here, someone who represents the state of Kentucky and especially your district. Thank you for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your summer. Thank you for listening to this episode, and please stay tuned for more.